Chapter 4. Gwyn. The world was moving like a blur around Gwyn. The echoing voices of orders, the dull poundings of armored feet, and the beating of her own heart thumping in her ears. The only thing that wasn't a shifting mess was Cedric, slumped at the base of the oak tree, blood smeared across his face. He didn't move a single time within the whirlwind of chaos, but somehow everything was revolving around him, and not the girl who was kneeling at his side, trying desperately to wake him. "Cedric!" Gwyn breathed, her voice shaking. She placed 2 fingers under his jaw and felt a slow pulse. She breathed out slowly, letting her shoulders relax. At least he wasn't dead. Gwyn's hand moved gently to push the prince's hair from his face, revealing a large, bloody bruise on his temple, the skin broken and already turning his pale complexion to a dark blue. Gwyn's breath took in sharply. This, undoubtedly, had been the final blow that the assassin had delivered at the end, the only glimpse Gwyn had managed to steal from where she had been shadowed by the army of soldiers rushing to his aid. Every single twitch he made, Gwyn expected him to wake up. She expected his eyes to flick open and for him to begin questioning everything. She wanted him to, even if she didn't have the answers he'd be looking for. He had to be strong and wake up. "Though the mountains have their shadows." Gwyn stopped, her breathy voice straining into nothing the moment she realized what she was doing. "Not here," she thought. "Not now, you idiot." No one seemed to notice the half-sung phrase. The only eyes turned in her direction were focused on the unconscious prince. "Where is he?" A single voice broke through the void, dripping with anxiety. "Where is my son? Is he all right?" The soldiers split apart, many falling to their knees in a bow as Galorian, wide-eyed and pale-faced, rushed past them. Gwyn backed away, letting the king take her place at the prince's side. "Oh, kings," Galorian mumbled, his voice shaking. He held Cedric close to him, whispering his name over and over. Feeling out of place, Gwyn left the protected ring, where Evander was waiting, straight-backed and attentive. In one hand, he clutched the black leather bag which often held his emergency medicines and ointments. He stood among a group of brightly clad noblemen and priestesses muttering to one another, their gazes wary as they studied the scene before them. Gwyn knew enough of the kingdom's government to recognize them as members of King Galorian's personal council. Avoiding their searching glances, Gwyn moved to stand beside her brother. Inhaling sharply, he whispered, "Did you see what happened?" Gwyn only nodded, suddenly feeling very small. She'd seen much of the fight, and what had she done? "I just stood there and cowered," she scolded herself. She should have rushed in sooner, or left for help before Cedric instructed her to. Thanks to her passivity, the prince was hurt, unconscious. He'd almost died. How could she have let that happen? Suddenly and unexpectedly, Evander's arm was pulling Gwyn into a hug. She leaned into the embrace and realized that her eyes had started watering again. She stared ahead, sniffling gently. "It's okay," Evander said gently to her. "You did well. The assassin is gone. A search has already given way throughout the castle, looking for any others. The prince will be okay. Everything is going to be okay." "How do you know?" "They might be hiding," Gwyn muttered. "They killed him." "Shh. Don't think about that. Prince Cedric is alive and here." The crowd of soldiers shifted and a cry rose up from the king. A cry of relief. "He's awake! Cedric! Cedric, can you hear me?" Gwyn pulled away from Evander and inched closer. Muttered conversations between the consoled soldiers rippled across the courtyard. As Gwyn weaved past them, she could see their faces beneath their helmets. The hard and concerned expressions ebbed away, replaced by small smiles as they strained to look over their comrades' heads. They didn't notice Gwyn slipping past them. She stopped just short of the force field the king's presence had created, feeling almost unwelcome to come any closer. And yet she couldn't help but feel the tension flee her body. Cedric was sitting upright, leaning into Galorian for support. He had one hand rubbing the side of his head, apparently already knowing where the bruise was, seeing as his fingers hovered above it, careful not to touch it. The prince looked up, spotting Gwyn. She gave a small wave and a reassuring smile, which he weakly returned. She could tell that he was still in a lot of pain, so she didn't push it. She wanted to talk to him, to make sure he was okay. Yet at the same time, she didn't know if he'd want to talk, or if he'd want to see her, or if she was even welcome anymore. Heart sinking, she turned to leave, but stopped herself when Cedric's gaze turned to the hem of her dress. It was rimmed with dark blood from the dead soldier. She immediately began to feel sick. All warmth drained from her face. Without a second glance back, she stole herself away from Cedric's view, hiding in the crowd of soldiers. She saw a few men carrying an unconscious man with rusty red hair away on a stretcher. Gwyn didn't know who he was, or how he had fallen, but her stomach dropped deeper as she saw his olive skin pale and mouth agape.
"I need more men searching the castle."
The captain of the guard appeared on the wall, a burning torch in his hand.
"We need to find all of the dead and wounded."
All of the soldiers came to attention and fell into order. Any idle chatter died down in an instant. The captain stopped in front of the men, pounding the end of his halberd on the stones to draw any of his men's wandering minds. It was unnecessary, as everyone was already looking to him, even the stunned prince. He held their attention easily as he stood above them, a presence of sturdy strength emanating from him, a beacon of hope even as their king seemed weak and scared. The captain signaled to a group of 12 soldiers, who were standing separately from the others. Gwyn noticed they had been the ones closest to the prince after the assassin had been apprehended.
"You men stay here. Keep a close watch on all the entrances to the courtyard. Sound the alarm if you see anything, and reinforcements will be sent immediately. The rest of you fall in. Report to Marshal Turrell of your assignments in the search."
In response, the large group of 100 or so men slammed the ends of their weapons on the ground as their captain had just done. And then they were gone. It wasn't particularly fast, though they moved with such order and precision that it felt as though they were a single, overwhelming force. They split to make room for the captain as he made his way towards Gwyn. No, as he made his way towards Evander. The man brushed past her as he stopped in front of the doctor and said in a low voice,
"Lord Evander, will you accompany the prince to his room with his personal guards and make sure everything is situated? See that he's comfortable, and that no serious harm has been done."
Evander nodded, his expression curt and serious. Though Gwyn could tell by the relaxation of his shoulders that he was more than relieved to have something to do. He didn't wait for another invitation and made a beeline for Cedric, black leather bag swaying with every stride of his thin legs. The captain didn't even acknowledge Gwyn as he followed her brother, ever keeping an air of control. She opened her mouth to object and say something, but she found that she had nothing to say. Gwyn's heart sunk in her chest as she saw Evander crouch at Cedric's side, quietly conversing with him. Cedric nodded numerous times, but a look of pained confusion twisted his face, proof that he understood precious little of what the doctor was saying. And Gwyn stood there, doing nothing, left behind as if she were invisible. She wanted more than anything to find a way to be useful, but she wasn't anything special, not like Evander. She wasn't particularly smart or clever or strong. Instead, she was just a figment worked into the background of a magnificent picture. Nothing but an extra, unimportant detail. And who's going to change that? She thought, hugging herself. Evander helped pull Cedric to his feet, and immediately one of the soldiers rushed forward to give the prince a strong shoulder to lean on. Cedric swayed and gasped, one hand instantly flying to his head. Gwyn felt a pang of regret and a million impulses washed through her brain. Me. I'm going to change that. I survived today. I survived an attack. Not on myself, exactly, but that doesn't matter. I'm not waiting this time for someone to tell me what to do. A strange sense of confidence pushed into her, confidence that had seemed to evade her earlier. She couldn't seem to stop herself as she marched herself over and planted herself behind Evander, head up and fists clenched. "What can I do?" she asked, and Evander turned, startled by the sudden sound of her voice.
"What are you doing?" he hissed. "This is a serious issue, Gwyn. Go find some other way to make yourself useful."
"I'm going to help."
"Not here."
He plastered a sympathetic smile on his face.
"Look, I know you've had a rough night. Get some rest and just stay out of the way, okay?"
"No, not okay," Gwyn said, exasperated. "I already failed to help tonight. I'm not going to just let that stand on my record."
"You didn't fail."
"Yes, I did. At the very least, I didn't succeed. I messed up and Prince Cedric almost died. Just let me help."
"I could use her help,"
a weary voice spoke up, much to everyone's surprise. Evander's head shot around to where Cedric was leaning heavily against the soldier. Gwyn's face lit up.
What would you need her help for?"
Evander asked, forcing his fake smile even further. Cedric shrugged.
"Whatever she's up for doing. Don't you think we could need as much help as we can?"
He winced, his free hand flying up to press against his head.
"We can get?"
Evander nodded, looking back at Gwyn, who was grinning in Cedric's direction, even though he had turned away, grimacing in pain. Her brother's expression seemed humbled, but also concerned.
"Are you sure you can handle being in the everything?"
"Why wouldn't I?" Gwyn folded her arms and stuck out her bottom lip, drilling Evander with a hard gaze.
"Actually, Gwyneth,"
Golorian said. He had straightened up, his hair smoothed down again and his robes brushed of any dirt or creases. Gwyn thought she could hear a slight quiver in his voice, but remarked to herself the skill in which he hid it behind a layer of carefully conjured strength. Gwyn tensed, her expression falling as the king approached her. He bent down so he was looking her in the eyes, making her feel smaller than she was.
"I need you," he continued, his voice low and his words chosen carefully, "to tell me everything you know. What all did you see?"
Gwyn hesitated, looking back at Cedric regretfully. Golorian waved a hand of dismissal towards the group, and Captain Verdon called to his soldiers. They marched off, Cedric in the center, and Evander trailing behind, an air of importance in his gait. Golorian began walking in the opposite direction, leaving Gwyn to follow. There was a strange silence between the two as she hurried to keep up. He didn't say anything, but the dull reflection in his eyes showed just how close he was to breaking. His hair seemed grayer than before, and his eyes cast more in the shadow of weariness. His straight-backed posture seemed more like a facade than ever before, leaving him looking even weaker than he had when he left her in the entry hall. "Are you all right, Your Majesty?" Gwyn inquired, sneaking up at his side. His eyes flicked down at her and he inhaled sharply.
"I'm just waiting for you to explain the evening, Lady Gwyneth."
His voice was stiff and hard, shielding the emotion hiding in the cavernous depths of his grey eyes.
I am very concerned for my son's well-being, as you know, and I'm afraid that my patience is at its tipping point."
"I'm sorry," she started.
"Just speak,"
came his curt response. Gwyn looked down at her hands and began. She related the events to the king, who silently, stoically, walked 2 steps ahead of her. He was a tower, and she was something else, shrouded and unseen in his shadow. This was the king. This was the man hiding under the genuine and kind soul who had greeted her so warmly and then worried so openly for his son. Gwyn couldn't help but be more than a little intimidated. She finished her explanation to the best of her ability, her voice sounding hollow and lost. Galorian didn't say anything, but instead stopped in his tracks, letting the breeze weave through his hair and leaving his face in darkness. Gwyn bowed her head, afraid she'd done yet another thing wrong, but Galorian waved a dismissive hand towards her.
"Thank you, Gwyneth. That is all I need. Now, leave me to think."
Bowing one more time, she ducked out of the way, letting him walk ahead of her. His stride was slow, pained and contemplative, his left leg burdened with a slight limp she hadn't noticed before. The air stilled as the king departed, keeping his head high as a symbol to the statuesque guards who bowed to him as he passed. Gwyn's stomach churned as she found herself alone, the only comfort from the haunting night being the king's watching over her in the stars. She'd always felt that at least one of them had been keeping an omniscient eye on her, however unimportant her existence was. There were times she could feel a presence that was beyond this world standing at her side, a hand on her shoulder or a gentle embrace, warm and understanding. When her parents failed to deliver, the feeling would compensate. It was that feeling that pulled her from the courtyard and set her starting towards Cedric's room.